Close your eyes. Imagine the world after Alexander the Great. The man who conquered everything was suddenly gone, and left behind an empire too big for anyone to control. What happened next? His generals, once brothers in arms, became rivals, kings, and enemies. They split the empire, built new dynasties, and started wars that would shape the ancient world for centuries. Tonight, let me take you on a journey through the rise and fall of Alexander's successors. A story of power, betrayal, and forgotten kingdoms. Told slowly, like a dream, so you can drift into sleep while traveling through history. The story begins in the summer of 323 BC. Alexander the Great, the young king who had marched from Greece all the way to India, suddenly fell sick in Babylon. For more than a decade, he had been unstoppable. The soldiers had followed him through deserts, mountains, and rivers. He defeated the mighty Persian Empire, founded new cities, and dreamed of ruling the whole known world. But no one expected the dream to end so quickly. Alexander was only 32 years old when he died. Some say he caught a terrible fever. Others whispered that he was poisoned by jealous generals. We will never know the truth. What we do know is this: his death left behind an empire that stretched from Egypt to India. It was too large, too new, and too fragile to survive without him. The first problem was that Alexander had no clear heir. His wife, Roxana, was pregnant. His half-brother, Aretas, was alive, but he was weak in both mind and body. The generals gathered around the king's deathbed, desperate to know his wishes. Some claim that when they asked Alexander who should succeed him, he whispered, "To the strongest." These three words would shape the future of his empire, because they gave no answer, only a challenge. After his death, the generals carried his body to Babylon and placed it in a golden coffin. But while the body was resting, their minds were racing. Who would rule? Who would command the army? Who would control the treasure? The men who had once been united under Alexander's banner now began to look at each other with suspicion. Friends became rivals. Brothers in arms became enemies. The empire quickly split into factions. Some wanted to crown Alexander's unborn son once he was born. Others wanted to give power to his half-brother. Still others believed that the generals themselves should share power. In the end, a temporary compromise was made. Aretas would be crowned as King Philip III, and when Alexander's son was born, he would be declared co-king. But everyone knew this arrangement was fragile, and behind the smiles and ceremonies, the generals were already planning their own moves. The most powerful among them were men like Ptolemy, Seleucus, Antigonus, and Lysimachus. They had fought beside Alexander for years. They were brave, skilled, and ambitious. Each one believed he deserved more than just a share of the empire. Each one thought he could be the true heir to Alexander's greatness. In the years that followed, these men would fight bloody wars against each other. They would carve up the empire into pieces. They would have found new dynasties that ruled for centuries. But all of that began here, in Babylon, on the night Alexander the Great closed his eyes forever. This was not just the death of a man, it was the birth of a new age, the age of the successors. After Alexander's sudden death, the empire that stretched from Greece to India stood like a giant with broken legs. Everyone could see its size, its power, and its wealth, but no one could agree on who should control it. The generals, once loyal brothers in arms, now turned into rival leaders. In Babylon, in the hot summer of 323 BC, the great council of commanders gathered. The air was heavy with suspicion. Each general brought his army close, ready to fight if the meeting went wrong. On one side stood Perdiccas, a strong and clever general who had been trusted by Alexander. He claimed that the baby soon to be born from Roxana, Alexander's wife, should be king. Until the child was old enough, Perdiccas himself would serve as regent, the protector of the empire. On the other side, Meleager and his supporters wanted Alexander's half-brother, Aretas, to rule immediately. He was weak in mind, but old enough to wear the crown, which made him easy to control. The debate grew heated. Voices rose. Soldiers muttered. For a moment, it seemed that swords would be drawn right there in Babylon. But finally, a fragile agreement was reached. Aretas was crowned as King Philip III, and when Roxana's child was born, he too would be declared king. Perdiccas was named regent, and he believed this gave him supreme authority over the generals. But he underestimated their ambition. The generals now divided the empire like slices of a pie. Each was given a satrapy, a province to govern. Ptolemy was given Egypt, a land rich in grain, gold, and ancient tradition. Seleucus received Babylon, the city of kings, a jewel at the heart of the empire. Antigonid was placed in charge of Phrygia, Lycia, and Pamphylia in Asia Minor, while Lysimachus took Thrace, a land at the edge of the empire. Others, too, received important territories. At first, this seemed like a fair division. The empire was still one, with 2 kings at the top, and Perdiccas as regent. But underneath, the cracks were already forming. The generals were no longer loyal soldiers following a single master. They were rulers of their own lands, with their own armies, and their own dreams of power. Tension grew worse when Perdiccas began to act like a king himself. The treasury and the kings. He even arranged the murder of Meleager, who had opposed him. This act shocked the other generals. They began to wonder if Perdiccas could kill one of his fellow commanders, who would be next. Meanwhile, Ptolemy in Egypt made a bold move. He stole Alexander's body while it was being transported to Macedonia. Instead of letting the corpse rest in the royal tomb of Ija, he brought it to Memphis in Egypt. By controlling Alexander's body, Ptolemy claimed a special connection to the dead king. This act was more than just symbolism. It was a direct challenge to Perdiccas. The partition of Babylon, as this division became known, did not solve the empire's problems. It only delayed the inevitable. The generals were now kings in everything but name. Their alliances were shallow, their trust was broken, and their ambitions limitless. The wars of the successors, the Diadochi, were about to begin. And in these wars, the world would witness betrayal. Shifting loyalties, endless battles, and the creation of new kingdoms that would outlast them all. The peace made at Babylon was fragile, like a thin sheet of glass. Everyone knew it would not last. The generals smiled at each other during ceremonies, but deep inside, they were sharpening their knives. And soon, those knives came out. The first major conflict broke out between Perdiccas, the regent of the empire, and Ptolemy, the satrap of Egypt. Their quarrel began when Ptolemy carried away the body of Alexander the Great and laid it in Egypt. This act made Ptolemy more than just a governor. He presented himself as the guardian of Alexander's memory. To the people, this gave him legitimacy and honor. To Perdiccas, it was an insult. He believed that only he had the right to guard Alexander's remains, since he was regent of the empire. Perdiccas reacted with fury, decided to march his army against Egypt and punish Ptolemy. But the plan was easier spoken than done. The Nile Delta was a dangerous place for an invading army. Ptolemy used clever tactics and local support to resist Perdiccas. When Perdiccas tried to cross the Nile, many of his soldiers drowned. His own officers lost faith in him. Soon his own men turned against him and murdered him in his tent. The mighty regent of the empire, who had hoped to rule all in Alexander's name, was dead. The fall of Perdiccas changed everything. Now no one was strong enough to control the entire empire. The idea of unity began to fade. Instead, each general started to dream of carving out his own kingdom. The wars of the successors were not just about loyalty to Alexander's family anymore. They became a battle for survival and ambition. But what of Alexander's family? King Philip III Aridius, the weak half-brother, and the young child, Alexander IV, were supposed to be the rulers. Sadly, they were little more than pawns in the hands of the generals. Roxana, the mother of Alexander IV, tried to protect her son, but she was surrounded by wolves. The generals spoke in the name of the kings, but in truth, they only cared for their own power. Meanwhile, in Asia Minor, Antigonid the One-Eyed began to rise. He was given command against Perdiccas' supporters, and he proved himself a skilled commander. Seleucus, who had once served as a simple commander of the elite troops, called the Hypospists, was also climbing the ladder. Both men would soon play a bigger role. The first wars of the successors ended with no clear unity, but the map of the empire was already changing. Ptolemy secured Egypt. Antipater, an old and wise general in Macedonia, held power in Greece. Antipater controlled much of Asia Minor, and Seleucus gained influence in Babylon. The empire of Alexander was still technically one, but in reality, it was now a collection of rival states. The dream of a united empire died with Perdiccas. From here, the wars would only grow larger, bloodier, and more complicated. The generals were no longer just commanders. They were becoming kings in all but name. This was just the beginning of the storm. Among Alexander's generals, one man stood out in both appearance and ambition. Antigonus, called the One-Eyed. He had lost one eye in battle long before, but that wound only made him look fiercer. He was tall, broad, and full of energy, even though he was older than many of the other commanders. After the fall of Perdiccas, Antigonus saw an opportunity. At first, Antigonus was trusted with a difficult job. The other generals gave him command to hunt down and destroy Perdiccas' loyal supporters in Asia Minor. He carried out this task with skill, using both clever strategy and raw force. One by one, the satraps who had sided with Perdiccas fell before him. His victories earned him new respect and new power. Soon, Antigonus held almost all of Asia Minor under his control. From the Aegean Sea in the west to the mountains of Phrygia in the east, his authority stretched wide. He built a strong army, not just with Macedonian veterans, but also with local soldiers. He rewarded loyalty, punished betrayal, and slowly began to act not just as a governor, but as an independent king. Antigonus was clever. He knew that the other generals were watching him closely. He pretended to be a loyal servant of the royal house, of Philip III Aridaeus, and young Alexander IV. Yet, behind this mask he was planning for much greater things. His dream was to reunite Alexander's empire under his own command. Antigonus' rise worried many of the others. Ptolemy in Egypt saw him as a threat. Seleucus in Babylon kept a cautious eye on him. Even Antipater in Macedonia, though old and nearing the end of his life, grew suspicious. But Antigonus moved carefully. He gathered wealth, built ships, and trained soldiers. He was preparing for the day when open war would decide who truly deserved Alexander's crown. When Antipater, the old regent in Macedonia, finally died in 319 BC, the balance of power shifted again. Antipater had been like glue, holding the empire together with his wisdom and authority. With him gone, the rivalries deepened. His chosen successor, Polyperchon, was not strong enough to command respect. Cassander, Antipater's own son, challenged him. This opened new conflicts in Greece and Macedonia. While Antigonus used the chaos to tighten his hold over Asia Minor, Antigonus also made use of propaganda. He declared that he was fighting for the freedom of the Greek cities, a promise that always stirred hearts. In reality, he wanted those cities for himself. He also began to dream bigger than the others, not just to defend his satrapy, but to claim Alexander's entire empire as his inheritance. By 315 BC, Antigonus was the most powerful of all the successors. His armies were vast, his fleets controlled the seas. His ambition was limitless. The others realized that if Antigonus was not stopped, he would soon become a new Alexander. And so, coalitions began to form. Ptolemy, Seleucus, Lysimachus, and Cassander started to join hands against him. The rise of Antigonus, the One-Eyed, marked a turning point. The wars of the successors were no longer just about holding territory. They became about stopping Antigonus's march toward universal rule. And this struggle would shape the next great chapter of their bloody story. By the year 315 BC, Antigonus the One-Eyed had grown too powerful for comfort. He controlled most of Asia Minor, had a strong fleet, and commanded a loyal and experienced army. To many, it looked as if he wanted to claim all of Alexander's empire for himself. The other generals, men who had fought side by side with him under Alexander, now feared him more than they feared each other. It was Ptolemy of Egypt who first raised the alarm. Ptolemy had already proven his cleverness by securing Alexander's body and placing it in Egypt, which gave him enormous prestige. He knew that if Antigonus became supreme ruler, Egypt would be his next target. So Ptolemy began reaching out to the others, forming what history calls the First Coalition. The coalition included Ptolemy in Egypt, Cassander in Macedonia, Lysimachus in Thrace, and later Seleucus in Babylon. These men had not always been friends. In fact, some had fought bitterly against each other in earlier years, but the threat of Antigonus forced them together. For the first time since Alexander's death, nearly all the great successors stood on one side, united against a single enemy. The war began with propaganda as much as with weapons. Canese claimed he was the true protector of Alexander's family, young Alexander IV, and his mother, Roxana. He told the Greek cities that he was fighting for their freedom, trying to win their loyalty. The coalition, on the other hand, painted Antigonid as a tyrant who wanted to enslave them all. This war of words spread across the Mediterranean, preparing the ground for battles. Soon, the fighting spread to many fronts. In Greece, Cassander tried to control the cities while facing opposition from those who supported Antigonid's promises of freedom. In Asia Minor and the eastern provinces, Antigonid fought to hold his territories. On the seas, fleets clashed for control of the trade routes and supply lines. Egypt, as always, played a key role, with Ptolemy using his wealth and ships to challenge Antigonid's power. One of the most important figures to join the coalition was Seleucus. At first, Seleucus had served under Antigonid, but he soon realized that Antigonid would never share true power. Fearing for his life, Seleucus fled Babylon and sought refuge with Ptolemy. From there, he planned his return. This was the beginning of Seleucus' rise as one of the greatest rulers of the Successor Age. The coalition achieved some victories, but Antigonid was a master strategist. He struck hard at his enemies, crushing smaller forces and keeping his position strong. He even tried to negotiate with some cities and rulers to break their loyalty to the coalition. For a time, it seemed as if he might win, despite being surrounded. But the coalition war drained resources, exhausted armies, and left no side truly victorious. Instead, it set the stage for an even greater struggle. By the end of this conflict, it was clear Antigonid was too powerful to ignore, but not strong enough to destroy his enemies all at once. The wars of the successors were entering a new and bloodier phase, and the dream of unity under one ruler was slipping further away. The first coalition showed the world that Alexander's empire was not just breaking apart, it was being torn to pieces by the very men who had once built it. Seleucus was not the most famous of Alexander's generals at first. He had served loyally, leading the elite hypaspists in many battles, but he was not as well known as Ptolemy or Antigonid, yet he had something very important: patience, cleverness, and a gift for survival. These qualities would make him one of the longest-lasting of Alexander's successors. After the fall of Perdiccas, Seleucus had been given the satrapy of Babylon, one of the most important provinces in the empire. Babylon was rich, central, and symbolic. Whoever controlled it could claim to be the heart of Alexander's empire, but his position there was always threatened. Antigonid, with his growing power in Asia Minor, soon looked at Babylon with hungry eyes. Seleucus understood the danger. At first, he tried to serve Antigonid, but he quickly realized that Antigonid trusted no one and wanted everything. Seleucus feared he would be replaced, or worse, killed. So, he fled Babylon and found safety with Ptolemy in Egypt. For years, he remained in exile, watching as the wars of the successors unfolded. But he never forgot Babylon. He was determined to return and claim it as his own. That chance came in 312 BC with Ptolemy's support and the distraction of Antigonid's fighting wars elsewhere, while Seleucus marched eastward. His army was small compared to Antigonid's forces. But Seleucus had an advantage. The people of Babylon still remembered him. When he entered the city, many welcomed him back as their rightful satrap. He did not conquer Babylon with just swords, he also used loyalty and memory. This event became known as the Babylonian War. Antigonid's son, Demetrius, later called the Besieger, was sent to crush Seleucus. Demetrius was young and brave, but Seleucus was cautious and wise. Instead of fighting one huge battle, Seleucus used guerrilla tactics. He struck quickly, then vanished into the countryside, used the wide rivers, marshes, and deserts of Mesopotamia to his advantage. Slowly but surely, Demetrius' forces grew, exhausted and frustrated. Seleucus' victory in Babylon was more than just a personal triumph. It marked the birth of a new kingdom. From Babylon, Seleucus began to expand eastward. He gained support from local peoples and pushed into Persia and beyond. His empire, which would later be called the Seleucid Empire, would become one of the largest of all the successor states, stretching eventually from the Aegean Sea to India. What made Seleucus unique was his vision. While many of the other successors were content with one region, Ptolemy with Egypt, Lysimachus with Thrace, Seleucus dreamed of ruling a truly vast and connected empire. He encouraged the building of cities, trade routes, and cultural exchange. His dynasty would mix Greek and Eastern traditions. making it one of the most interesting legacies of Alexander's broken empire. The return of Seleucus to Babylon showed that no matter how many times the successors fought, the map was never fixed. Power shifted, lands changed hands, and fortunes rose and fell like waves. Babylon, once ruled by mighty kings of Mesopotamia, had now become the stage for yet another struggle, and Seleucus had stepped into the spotlight as one of the most important players. The wars were far from over, but now a new contender stood firm. While Seleucus was carving his place in Babylon, another figure was rising to fame on the battlefield. This was Demetrius, the son of Antigonus the One-Eyed. Young, tall, and handsome, Demetrius carried himself like a hero from legend. Soldiers loved him for his bravery, and people admired him for his charm. But what made him famous and gave him his nickname was his talent for attacking cities. He would become known as Demetrius, the Besieger. Demetrius first gained attention in 312 BC, when his father Antigonus sent him to fight against Ptolemy of Egypt. Ptolemy had become Antigonus' greatest rival, and the two men clashed many times. Demetrius' first battles were difficult. At Gaza, he suffered a heavy defeat against Ptolemy and Seleucus. His army was crushed, and for a while it seemed his career might end before it had truly begun. But Demetrius did not give up. Like his father, he had ambition burning inside him. He rebuilt his forces and prepared for another chance. That chance came a few years later, when the island city of Rhodes refused to support Antigonus. Rhodes was rich, powerful in trade, and closely allied with Ptolemy. Antigonus wanted to force it into his side, so he sent Demetrius with a massive army and navy to besiege the city. What followed became one of the most famous sieges in ancient history. Demetrius built enormous war machines to break Rhodes' defenses. He constructed huge towers, battering rams, and even floating siege engines taller than city walls. These machines terrified enemies and amazed allies. Though the siege lasted for more than a year, and in the end, Demetrius failed to capture Rhodes. His creativity and determination earned him the title Poliorcetes, the Besieger. Even in defeat, his reputation grew. People across the Greek world spoke of his daring. Demetrius' fame also showed the changing nature of the Successor Wars. While his father Antigonus had focused on building a vast empire in Asia, Demetrius' battles spread into the Aegean and Greece. He tried to win the loyalty of Greek cities by presenting himself as their liberator, much like Alexander once had. Some cities welcomed him, others resisted, but everywhere he went, his name inspired excitement. For Antigonus, Demetrius was more than just a son. He was a symbol of hope. Together, father and son dreamed of restoring Alexander's empire under their rule. Antigonus had the wisdom and power, while Demetrius had youth and charisma. They believed that together, they could outlast the coalition of enemies that surrounded them. But Demetrius' rise also made the other successors nervous. Ptolemy, Cassander, Seleucus, and Lysimachus all feared the combined strength of Antigonus and his son. They knew that if they did not act, the Antigonid dynasty might soon dominate the entire ancient world. Demetrius' story was just beginning. Its victories and failures would shape the next stage of the wars. They would rise to kingship, taste glory, and also face crushing defeats. For now, though, the world watched in awe as the young besieger carried forward the fiery ambition of his father. By 301 BC, the wars of Alexander's successors had reached a boiling point. Antigonus the One-Eyed and his son Demetrius the Besieger had grown so powerful that the other rulers feared for their survival. If father and son were not stopped, they might reunite Alexander's empire under their own rule. And so, the greatest coalition yet was formed. Cassander of Macedonia, Lysimachus of Thrace, Seleucus of Babylon, and Ptolemy of Egypt. Together, they gathered their armies for a final showdown. The stage was set at a place in Asia Minor called Ipsus. The battlefield at Ipsus was crowded with tens of thousands of soldiers. Antigonus and Demetrius commanded a huge force, nearly 70,000 infantry, 1,000 cavalry, and 75 war elephants. On the other side, the coalition had even more men, and, thanks to Seleucus, a terrifying advantage. 500 war elephants brought from India. These elephants were the tanks of the ancient world. Massive beasts that could smash through lines of soldiers and scatter cavalry. The battle began with Demetrius leading the cavalry on a daring charge. His attack was brilliant at first, He smashed into the enemy's horsemen, driving them back and threatening to break the coalition's flank. The soldiers of Antigonus cheered, believing victory was close. But here came the turning point. Demetrius' charge carried him too far from the main army. Instead of turning back quickly, he chased the fleeing cavalry deep into the distance. When he tried to return, he found his way blocked by Seleucid war elephants. With Demetrius cut off, Antigonus' army lost its strongest weapon. The coalition forces pushed forward. Seleucus used his elephants not just in battle, but as walls, creating barriers that kept Demetrius from returning to his father. On the ground, infantry clashed fiercely, but slowly Antigonus' men began to give way. In the chaos, Antigonus, over 80 years old, stood tall on the battlefield. He refused to leave, even as missiles rained down around him. Loyal soldiers begged him to retreat, but he answered, "Antigonus does not run." Moments later, he was struck down and killed, ending the life of one of the greatest of Alexander's successors. His death broke the spirit of his army. The Antigonid forces collapsed, and the coalition claimed victory. The Battle of Ipsus was a turning point in history. With Antigonus dead, the dream of reuniting Alexander's empire under one ruler was finished forever. The empire was now divided into several lasting kingdoms. Cassander controlled Macedonia and Greece. Lysimachus gained much of Asia Minor. Seleucus held the eastern provinces, and Ptolemy ruled securely over Egypt. Demetrius escaped with a small force, but his father's dream had died on that battlefield. Ipsus showed the brutal reality of the Successor Wars. These men, once comrades of Alexander, had turned the world into a chessboard of endless battles. Empires rose and fell in the span of a single lifetime. And though the names of Alexander's successors might not shine as brightly as his, their wars reshaped the ancient world into something entirely new. After the great battle of Ipsus, one man stood more secure than ever before, Ptolemy of Egypt. While others gambled their lives on giant battles across Asia, Ptolemy had chosen a different path. He focused on one thing above all: holding and strengthening Egypt. This decision would make him the founder of a dynasty that lasted almost 300 years. From the moment Alexander died, Ptolemy understood that Egypt was a prize like no other. Its fertile Nile Valley could feed millions. Its deserts and seas formed natural defenses that protected it from easy invasion. Its wealth, drawn from trade and farming, gave him the resources to pay his soldiers and build fleets. While Antigonus dreamed of ruling the whole empire, Ptolemy calmly built a stable kingdom in Egypt. One of Ptolemy's smartest moves was capturing Alexander's body. By burying the great conqueror in Memphis and later in the city of Alexandria, Ptolemy connected himself directly to Alexander's memory. It was a symbol that mattered deeply to soldiers and citizens alike. People believed that the one who possessed Alexander's body carried part of his glory. This gave Ptolemy prestige no other successor could claim. In government, Ptolemy proved cautious but clever. Unlike some of the other generals, he did not try to copy Alexander's restless conquests. Instead, he blended Macedonian and Egyptian traditions. He allowed the people of Egypt to continue worshiping their gods, while also spreading Greek culture through new cities and institutions. The most famous of these was Alexandria, which became not only the capital of Egypt, but also one of the greatest cultural centers of the ancient world. Its lighthouse, library, and bustling markets would shine for centuries. Ptolemy also managed his wars wisely. He fought when necessary, against Antigonus, against Demetrius, even against Seleucus at times. But he never risked everything in one battle, unless he had a good chance of winning. His cautious nature saved Egypt from the disasters that struck other kingdoms. Perhaps most importantly, Ptolemy secured something the others did not: a lasting dynasty. In 305 BC, he declared himself king, taking the title Ptolemy I Soter, meaning savior. From that moment on, Egypt would be ruled by his family, the Ptolemaic dynasty, for nearly 3 centuries. His descendants included Cleopatra VII, the famous queen who later faced Julius Caesar and Mark Antony. This dynasty was the longest-living legacy of Alexander's successors. Under Ptolemy, Egypt became a powerful and respected kingdom. While the wars of the successors raged across Asia and Greece, Egypt stood firm. Its ships ruled the seas of the eastern Mediterranean, its grain-fed nations, and its culture attracted scholars, poets, and scientists from all over the world. In the end, Ptolemy may not have conquered as much land as Antigonus or Seleucus, but his choices gave him something far greater: stability, longevity, and a dynasty that outlasted them all. His kingdom became the shining jewel of the Hellenistic world. While Ptolemy was turning Egypt into a powerful kingdom, another of Alexander's successors was carving out his own realm in the rugged lands of the north. His name was Lysimachus, a man often overlooked compared to Ptolemy, Seleucus, or Antigonus, yet his role in shaping the successor kingdoms was vital. Lysimachus ruled Thrace, a wild and difficult land at the edge of Alexander's empire. Thrace was not like Egypt or Babylon. It was not rich in grain or filled with ancient cities. Instead, it was a land of mountains, forests, and fierce tribes. To control it required strength, discipline, and constant fighting. Lysimachus was well suited for this. He was a tough soldier, known for his endurance and bravery. Some stories even say he once wrestled a lion with his bare hands, a tale that made him seem larger than life to his followers. At first, Lysimachus played a smaller role in the wars of the successors. While men like Antigonus and Ptolemy were fighting great battles, Lysimachus was busy securing Thrace and building his power step by step. He fought against the restless Thracian tribes, strengthened his army, and built cities to secure his control. Slowly, Thrace became more stable, and Lysimachus was able to look beyond its borders. The turning point for Lysimachus came after the Battle of Ipsus in 301 BC. Antigonus, the One-Eyed, had been killed, and the coalition divided his lands. Lysimachus received a large portion of Asia Minor, giving him territory far richer and more valuable than Thrace alone. Suddenly, Lysimachus was no longer a minor player. He was one of the great kings of the Hellenistic world. But with new lands came new challenges. Asia Minor was full of wealthy cities, each with its own ambitions. It was also threatened by Antigonus' son Demetrius, who still dreamed of reclaiming his father's glory. To protect his territories, Lysimachus relied on alliances. He worked closely with Seleucus, who had become powerful in the east, and with Cassander in Macedonia. These partnerships allowed him to balance the constant threats around him. Lysimachus was not as charismatic as Demetrius, nor as wealthy as Ptolemy, nor as visionary as Seleucus. But he was steady, cautious, and strong. These traits helped him survive when many others fell. Over time, he expanded his rule, and his kingdom stretched across Thrace and western Asia Minor. Later in his life, Lysimachus even set his eyes on Macedonia itself. After Cassander's death, Macedonia fell into chaos, and Lysimachus was among those who tried to claim it. His ambitions had grown far beyond the forests of Thrace. Lysimachus' story shows that even in the shadows of giants, determination and patience could build a kingdom. Though he may not be remembered as brightly as Alexander or Ptolemy, Lysimachus carved out his own place in history. His rule brought Thrace into the wider Hellenistic world, and his power helped shape the fragile balance among the successors. Among all of Alexander's successors, few were as ruthless and ambitious as Cassander. He was the son of Antipater, the old general who had once ruled Macedonia as regent, while Alexander was away conquering Asia. But unlike his father, was respected for his wisdom. Cassander would be remembered for his cruelty and iron will. His story is one of power, betrayal, and the slow death of Alexander's royal family. When Antipater died in 319 BC, he did not leave the throne of Macedonia to his son. Instead, he named Polyperchon as regent. Cassander was furious. He believed that as Antipater's son, leadership belonged to him. Determined to seize power, Cassander began plotting. He made alliances with other successors, especially Antigonus and Ptolemy, and soon launched a struggle for control of Macedonia. Cassander's rise was marked by cold calculation. He was not a brilliant battlefield commander like Demetrius, nor a great visionary like Seleucus, but he was clever in politics. He bribed, negotiated, and used force when needed. Slowly, he gained control of Macedonia and Greece, and one of Cassander's most shocking acts was against Alexander's own family. To secure his throne, he needed to remove all rivals, including the bloodline of Alexander the Great himself. Roxana, Alexander's widow, and her young son, Alexander IV, were dangerous to him. As long as they lived, they could be used by rivals as symbols of true legitimacy. At first, Cassander kept them imprisoned, but eventually, he ordered their deaths in secret. The boy, Alexander's only son, was quietly murdered, ending the direct royal line of the conqueror. Cassander also struck against Olympias, Alexander's mother. Olympias had tried to protect her grandson and stirred revolts against Cassander. When he captured her, Cassander had her executed as well. With these brutal acts, Cassander erased the Argead dynasty, the ancient line of kings that had ruled Macedonia for centuries. From then on, Macedonia belonged to him and his descendants. Despite his cruelty, Cassander also tried to present himself as a builder and protector of Greek culture. He founded new cities, the most famous being Thessalonica, named after his wife, and Cassandreia, named after himself. He supported the arts and tried to show that he was not only a destroyer, but also a ruler who could bring stability. Yet the shadow of his crimes always followed him. Cassander's rule brought a measure of order to Macedonia, but it was always fragile. His enemies never forgot him, and his kingdom was constantly threatened by rivals like Demetrius, who still dreamed of reclaiming Macedonia for himself. In the end, Cassander's reign was short compared to the dynasties of Ptolemy or Seleucus. After his death in 297 BC, his sons fought among themselves, and Macedonia soon fell into chaos once again. But Cassander's name would be remembered in history as the man who destroyed Alexander's family and seized the throne through fear and blood. After the death of his father, Antigonus the One-Eyed, at the Battle of Ipsus in 301 BC, Demetrius the besieger's world collapsed. Once he had stood beside his father as heir to a vast empire, but now he was a king without a kingdom. Yet Demetrius was not the kind of man to fade quietly into history. His ambition, charm, and daring kept him at the center of events for decades. He would become known as the Wandering King. At first, Demetrius still had a fleet of powerful ships and loyal soldiers. Though his father's Asian empire was gone, Demetrius used his navy to keep control of parts of the Aegean Sea. He sailed from island to island, capturing cities and presenting himself as the liberator of Greece. Some cities welcomed him, others resisted, but everywhere he went, his name stirred excitement and fear. In 294 BC, Demetrius achieved a stunning comeback. Through a mixture of force and cunning, he captured Macedonia, seizing the very throne once held by Alexander the Great. For a brief time, Demetrius stood at the height of his power. He ruled Macedonia and much of Greece, presenting himself as the rightful heir to Alexander's legacy. Statues were raised in his honor, and his reputation as a glamorous and daring king reached its peak. But Demetrius' rule was unstable. Unlike Cassander, who had rooted himself firmly in Macedonia through fear, Demetrius relied heavily on his charm and his promises. His extravagant lifestyle, with grand feasts and lavish spending, won him admirers, but also stirred resentment. His enemies never forgot him, and soon they formed coalitions once again. Lysimachus, Seleucus, and Ptolemy combined their forces to challenge his throne. By 288 BC, Demetrius was driven out of Macedonia. His kingdom crumbled, and he was forced once more to wander with only his fleet and a band of loyal soldiers. Still, he did not give up. With restless energy, he turned east, dreaming of conquering Asia and carving out a new empire for himself. He marched into the lands of Seleucus, attacking with bold raids, but fortune was no longer on his side. His men grew tired, his resources ran low, and his enemies closed in. Finally, in 285 BC, exhausted and abandoned by many of his followers, Demetrius surrendered to Seleucus. Unlike Cassander, who had shown no mercy to rivals, Seleucus treated Demetrius with surprising kindness. He did not kill him, but kept him in honorable captivity. For the last years of his life, Demetrius lived in Seleucus' court, a shadow of the restless king he had once been. He died in 283 BC, far from the throne he had once claimed. Though Demetrius failed to build a lasting empire, his story was unforgettable. His daring sieges, his glamorous lifestyle, and his endless ambition made him one of the most colorful of Alexander's successors. His descendants, however, would carry on his legacy. The Antigonid dynasty would eventually reclaim Macedonia and rule it for generations. Demetrius may have been a wandering king, but his name lived on long after his restless journeys ended. After his dramatic return to Babylon, Seleucus began one of the most remarkable journeys of all the successors. Unlike Ptolemy, who focused only on Egypt, or Cassander, who clung to Macedonia, Seleucus dreamed much bigger. He wanted an empire that stretched across the vast lands of the East, Persia, Mesopotamia, and beyond. His patience, clever politics, and skill in battle allowed him to create what became known as the Seleucid Empire, one of the largest kingdoms of the Hellenistic world. Seleucus' rise began with small victories. From Babylon, he expanded into Media and Persia, regaining lands once ruled by Alexander. His strategy was simple but effective. Respect local traditions, reward loyalty, and keep a strong army ready for defense. Many Eastern peoples accepted him because he presented himself not just as a conqueror, but as a protector. In time, Seleucus' reputation spread across the East. But Seleucus was not only a warrior, he was also a builder. He founded many new cities, giving them Greek-style governments, theaters, temples, and marketplaces. The most famous of these was Seleucia Tigris, a great city near Babylon that became his capital. It was filled with wide streets, public buildings, and trade routes that connected east and west. Through these cities, Greek culture spread across Asia, blending with the older traditions of Persia and Mesopotamia. This mixing of cultures became one of the hallmarks of the Hellenistic world. Seleucus also secured his empire with smart alliances. At Ipsus, he had fought alongside Lysimachus, Ptolemy, and Cassander to defeat Antigonus. But once Antigonus was gone, Seleucus carefully watched his allies. He knew they might one day turn against him. His greatest opportunity came when Lysimachus grew greedy and tried to expand too far. In 281 BC, Seleucus defeated Lysimachus at the Battle of Corupedium, gaining control of Asia Minor. For a brief moment, Seleucus stood as the most powerful of all the successors. Seleucus even dreamed of taking Macedonia itself, uniting East and West under his rule. But fate had other plans. In 281 BC, just after his victory over Lysimachus, Seleucus was assassinated by Ptolemy Koronos, a rival claimant to the Macedonian throne. The great builder of the Eastern Empire was struck down at the very height of his power. Even so, Seleucus left behind a dynasty that would last for centuries. His son, Antiochus I, and later rulers, carried on his vision, creating one of the longest living of the successor states. The Seleucid Empire became a bridge between East and West, stretching from the Aegean to the borders of India. Though it faced constant challenges, it remained a major power until the rise of Rome many generations later. Seleucus' story shows how patience and strategy could turn a forgotten general into a king of kings. He may not have had Alexander's charisma, but his endurance and vision gave him an empire that echoed Alexander's dream, vast, multicultural, and full of ambition. By the early 280s BC, the map of Alexander's shattered empire was once again shifting. Lysimachus, the tough ruler of Thrace and Asia Minor, had risen from a frontier soldier to one of the most powerful kings of the Hellenistic world. But like so many of the successors, his ambition finally led him to ruin. Lysimachus had ruled Thrace for decades, battling wild tribes and slowly expanding his power. After the Battle of Ipsus, he gained much of Western Asia Minor, giving him wealthy cities and strong armies. For a time, he stood shoulder to shoulder with Seleucus, Ptolemy, and Cassander as one of the great kings. But as the years passed, Lysimachus grew suspicious, harsh, and increasingly cruel. One of the greatest causes of his downfall came from within his own family. His second wife, Arsinoe, pushed him to favor her sons over his eldest son, Agathocles. Agathocles was well liked by the army and seen as a natural heir. But Arsinoe whispered lies into Lysimachus's ear, convincing him that Agathocles was plotting against him. In a shocking act, Lysimachus ordered his own son executed. This decision horrified his subjects and allies. Many of them turned away from him, seeing him as a tyrant who could not be trusted. Seleucus, always watchful, saw an opportunity. The Eastern king had already built a massive empire, stretching from Babylon to Asia Minor. Now, he prepared to challenge Lysimachus directly. In 281 BC, the two old generals met in battle at Corupedium, in Western Asia Minor. The fight was fierce, but Seleucus' experience and numbers gave him the advantage. Lysimachus, by then an old man in his 70s, fought bravely until the very end, but was killed on the battlefield. With Lysimachus dead, his kingdom collapsed almost immediately. Seleucus marched in and took control of Asia Minor, adding it to his already vast empire. For a brief moment, Seleucus seemed to stand on the edge of greatness, with Macedonia itself now within his reach. He dreamed of uniting both East and West under his rule. But the struggle for Macedonia was never simple. Cassander's death had already thrown the land into chaos, and many rival claimants were fighting for the throne. Among them was Ptolemaic Egypt, a wild and ambitious prince who would soon play a bloody role in Macedonia's fate. Seleucus, at the height of his power, crossed into Europe to claim Macedonia in 281 BC. The dream of ruling both East and West seemed close at last. But before he could secure the throne, fate struck. Ptolemaic Egypt assassinated him, ending his life just when victory seemed certain. The throne of Macedonia slipped away, and once again the land fell into confusion. The death of Lysimachus and then Seleucus within the same year showed just how unstable the world of the successors had become. No matter how powerful a king seemed, ambition, betrayal, and sudden death could bring it all crashing down. Macedonia, the heart of Alexander's homeland, was once again open to struggle and bloodshed. After the death of Lysimachus and Seleucus in 281 BC, the old generation of Alexander's successors had almost disappeared. The stage was now open for new, younger rulers to fight over the pieces of the empire. At the center of this chaos was Ptolemaic Egypt, a man whose short but violent reign in Macedonia became one of the most shocking chapters of the Successor Wars. Ptolemaic Egypt was the eldest son of Ptolemy I of Egypt, but he had been pushed aside when his father chose a younger son as heir. Angry and ambitious, Egypt left Egypt and wandered among the courts of other rulers, waiting for his chance. That chance came after the death of Seleucus. In a bold and treacherous move, Ptolemaic Egypt assassinated Seleucus in 281 BC, then declared himself king of Macedonia. At first, many Macedonians accepted him. After years of constant wars and weak rulers, they were desperate for a strong hand. Egypt promised to bring stability, but soon his true nature was revealed. He ruled with violence and cruelty, executing rivals and breaking promises. His name, Keranos, meant thunderbolt, and he lived up to it, striking suddenly, fiercely, and without mercy. One of his most infamous acts was against the royal family of Lysimachus. When Arsinoe, the widow of Lysimachus, and his own half-sister fled to him for protection, he pretended to welcome her. But then he murdered her 2 sons in front of her eyes, destroying her hopes and seizing more power for himself. This act shocked even the war-hardened people of Macedonia. For a short time, however, Keranos held the throne. He even defeated an invasion from the Gauls, tribes from the north who were raiding into Greece and Macedonia. His courage in battle won him respect among soldiers, but his arrogance soon led to disaster. In 279 BC, when the Gauls returned in even greater numbers, Keranos rushed into battle without proper preparation. In the fight, he was captured and brutally killed by the invaders. His head, it is said, was carried on a spear as a trophy. With Keranos dead, Macedonia once again fell into chaos. Rival claimants, foreign invaders, and rebellious cities all fought for control. For years, Macedonia had been the heart of Alexander's empire, but now it seemed cursed, unable to find a stable ruler. While Egypt under Ptolemy and the Seleucid lands in Asia grew into strong kingdoms, Macedonia became a battlefield where kings rose and fell with terrifying speed. The violent reign of Ptolemaic Egypt showed how far the successors had drifted from Alexander's dream. Once Macedonia had been the center of an empire that stretched across the world, now, under Keranos, it became a land of betrayal, murder, and chaos. His thunderbolt had burned bright, but it ended in ashes. After the bloody fall of Ptolemaic Egypt in 279 BC, Macedonia was left in ruins. The Gauls roamed freely across the land, plundering villages and striking fear into the people. Rival claimants fought over the throne, and kings came and went so quickly that few could even remember their names. It seemed as if Macedonia, the homeland of Alexander the Great, would never recover its strength. But out of this chaos, one family rose again: the Antigonids. descendants of Demetrius the Besieger. Though Demetrius had died a prisoner years earlier, his son, Antigonus II Gonatas, had survived. Patient and steady, Antigonus was very different from his father, where Demetrius had been restless, daring, and often reckless. Antigonus was careful and practical. He watched the chaos in Macedonia from the safety of Greece, slowly gathering support and waiting for the right moment to strike. That moment came in 277 BC. The Gauls had grown too bold, and the Macedonians were desperate for a leader strong enough to protect them. Antigonus gathered an army and marched north. At the Battle of Lysimachia, he faced the invading Gauls in a decisive fight. Using discipline and strategy, he crushed them and drove them out of Macedonia. This victory not only secured the land, but also won him the throne. For the first time in decades, Macedonia had a stable ruler. As King Antigonus II focused not on vast conquests, but on stability. He rebuilt the weakened kingdom, restored order, and re-established Macedonia's dominance over Greece. He faced challenges from rivals like Pyrrhus of Epirus, the famous general who gave the world the phrase Pyrrhic victory, but Antigonus managed to hold his ground. One of his greatest strengths was his ability to combine force with diplomacy. When he could not win by war, he negotiated. When he faced rebellion in Greek cities, he used both soldiers and clever politics to bring them back under Macedonian control. Slowly, he restored Macedonia's reputation as the leading power in the Greek world. The Antigonid dynasty that began with him would last for more than a century. While other successor dynasties, the Ptolemies in Egypt and the Seleucids in Asia, struggled with civil wars and foreign threats, the Antigonids managed to keep Macedonia strong. They became the guardians of Alexander's homeland, carrying on the legacy of the once great conqueror. Yet Antigonus II also knew the limits of his power. He did not dream of conquering the whole empire like his grandfather Antigonus the One-Eyed or his father Demetrius. Instead, he focused on holding what he had. This realism gave his dynasty strength, but it also meant that Macedonia would never again dominate the world as it had under Alexander. The return of the Antigonids to Macedonia brought a new era of stability, but it was also the beginning of a long struggle with the rising power of Rome. For now, however, Antigonus Gonatas had achieved what many before him had failed to do: restore order to a land torn apart by decades of bloodshed. While Macedonia struggled with chaos and bloodshed, Egypt under the Ptolemies grew stronger and brighter. The dynasty founded by Ptolemy, the first Soter, had chosen stability over reckless conquest. And that decision transformed Egypt into the most dazzling kingdom of the Hellenistic world. At the heart of this glory stood the city of Alexandria, the shining jewel of the Mediterranean. Ptolemy had carefully built his power, blending Greek and Egyptian traditions to win loyalty from both soldiers and subjects. When he died in 283 BC, his son Ptolemy II, Philadelphus, inherited a kingdom already strong. But Ptolemy II took it further. He turned Egypt into a land of wealth, learning, and wonder. Alexandria was his masterpiece. Founded by Alexander himself, the city grew under the Ptolemies into one of the greatest cities in the ancient world. Its harbor bustled with ships carrying goods from every corner of the Mediterranean and beyond. Grain from the Nile, gold from Nubia, spices from Arabia, and silks from the East all passed through its markets. Traders, sailors, and scholars filled its streets, speaking dozens of languages. Two monuments made Alexandria famous above all: the Great Library and the Lighthouse of Pharos. The library was said to contain hundreds of thousands of scrolls, collected from across the world. Captains who docked in Alexandria had their books taken, copied, and stored in its halls. Scholars from Greece, Egypt, Babylon, and India studied there, making it the center of knowledge and science. The Lighthouse of Pharos, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, stood tall to guide ships safely into the harbor. Its light could be seen for miles across the sea, a symbol of Egypt's wealth and power. The Ptolemies also encouraged culture and religion. They built temples for Egyptian gods, but also supported Greek philosophy and art. They presented themselves as pharaohs to the Egyptian people, while ruling as kings to their Greek subjects. This careful balancing act kept Egypt stable, even while other kingdoms fell into constant wars. But the Ptolemies were not only peaceful builders. They also maintained a strong navy that dominated the eastern Mediterranean. With their wealth, they hired mercenaries, built warships, and interfered in Greek politics when it suited them. Ptolemy II in particular fought wars against the Seleucids, ensuring Egypt remained a rival to the Eastern Empire. Still, it was Alexandria's brilliance that made the Ptolemaic dynasty truly special. People from across the known world dreamed of visiting its markets, temples, and libraries. It was a city where East met West, where Greek learning mixed with Egyptian tradition, and where the memory of Alexander lived on in stone and marble. The glory of Alexandria symbolized the success of the Ptolemy strategy. While others fought endless wars, Egypt prospered. While others gambled their kingdoms in great battles, the Ptolemies secured a dynasty that would endure for centuries. Long after many of the successors had been forgotten, Alexandria's name would still shine. While the Ptolemies were building a shining kingdom in Egypt, the Seleucids were struggling to control a massive empire in Asia. The Seleucid dynasty, founded by Seleucus I, ruled lands stretching from the Aegean Sea to the borders of India. It was the largest of all the successor kingdoms, but also the hardest to hold together. Seleucus had been a patient and clever builder. But after his assassination in 281 BC, his son Antiochus I inherited the throne. Antiochus faced enormous challenges. The Seleucid Empire was simply too vast. Its territories included Greece, Asia Minor, Mesopotamia, Persia, and even parts of Central Asia. Each region had its own people, languages, traditions, and ambitions. To hold them all together required endless energy. Antiochus and his successors tried to solve this by founding cities. Everywhere they went, they built new Greek-style settlements, giving them names like Antioch, Seleucia, and Laodicea. These cities became centers of trade, culture, and military power. Through them, Greek language and customs spread deep into Asia, blending with the old traditions of Persia and Mesopotamia. This mixture created a rich and unique Hellenistic culture. But the Seleucid kings also faced constant wars. Their greatest rivals were the Ptolemies of Egypt. For more than a century, the two dynasties fought a series of conflicts known as the Syrian Wars. These wars were usually fought over control of Syria, a region between Egypt and the Seleucid lands. Victory shifted back and forth. Sometimes the Ptolemies won, sometimes the Seleucids, but neither side could hold the land permanently. The Seleucids also had to defend their eastern borders. Faraway provinces like Bactria and Parthia were difficult to control. Governors there sometimes declared independence, creating breakaway kingdoms. The further the Seleucid kings were from the east, the harder it was to bring these lands back under control. Over time, these regions drifted away, showing that the empire's size was both its strength and its weakness. Despite these struggles, the Seleucid Empire remained a giant. Its armies were among the largest in the world, filled with Macedonian phalanxes, war elephants, cavalry, and mercenaries. Its kings built magnificent palaces and temples, trying to present themselves as heirs of both Alexander and the ancient kings of Persia. They ruled not just with swords, but with ceremony, wealth, and prestige. Yet the constant pressure wore them down. The Seleucid kings had to fight on too many fronts, against Egypt in the west, against rebellious provinces in the east, and against ambitious rivals in Asia Minor and Greece. They were powerful, but their empire was always at risk of breaking apart. The story of the Seleucids is one of both greatness and fragility. They held the largest share of Alexander's empire, but they were never truly secure. Every victory led to new challenges, and every king struggled to keep control. In the end, their vast empire was like a sandcastle built on the shore. Impressive, but constantly threatened by the waves of war and rebellion. While the Seleucids fought for control of Asia and the Ptolemies shone in Egypt, the Antigonid dynasty focused on Greece and Macedonia. Their power did not stretch as far as the great empires of Asia or Egypt. But they held the homeland of Alexander, and that gave them a special place in the Hellenistic world. After Demetrius, the besieger's restless adventures and failures, it was his son, Antigonus, the second Gonatas, who finally brought stability. By defeating the Gauls and restoring order in Macedonia around 277 BC, he became the foundation of the Antigonid dynasty. Like his father and grandfather, Antigonus II was realistic. He did not dream of ruling the whole empire, but instead focused on holding Macedonia firmly and controlling the Greek cities. The Greek world at this time was restless. Cities like Athens, Sparta, and Corinth still held on to their pride and independence. Many resented Macedonian rule and longed for freedom. Antigonus II had to use a careful mix of diplomacy and force to keep them under his influence. He stationed garrisons in key cities, controlled important fortresses, and made alliances when needed. Over time, he established a strong grip on Greece, even though revolts often flared up. The Antigonids also had to deal with new challengers, such as Pyrrhus of Epirus, a brilliant general whose daring campaigns became legendary. Pyrrhus once invaded Macedonia and even claimed the throne for a short while. He also fought against Rome and Italy, where his costly victories gave rise to the famous phrase, Pyrrhic victory. But despite Pyrrhus' brilliance, the Antigonids managed to survive his attacks and eventually regained control. What made the Antigonids strong was their ability to adapt. They knew they could not match the wealth of Egypt or the size of the Seleucid Empire, so they focused on discipline, strategy, and the loyalty of the Macedonian army. The phalanx of Macedonia, rows of soldiers carrying long spears, remained the backbone of their power. With this army, the Antigonids defended their homeland and kept Greece under their shadow. Under Antigonus II and his successors, Macedonia returned to being the leading power in Greece. The dynasty built fortresses, maintained a strong fleet, and kept watch over the Greek leagues that often tried to resist. Though their empire was smaller, it was stable and lasted longer than many of the grander dreams of the other successors. The Antigonids represented the endurance of Macedonia itself. Alexander's conquests may have spread far across Asia, but it was his homeland that carried on his military traditions. For nearly a century after Ipsus, the Antigonids kept Greece and Macedonia united under their rule, proving that even in a world of giants, steady strength could survive. But even as they held their ground, a new power was rising in the West, a power that would one day sweep away the Antigonids and the other successor kingdoms alike. That power was Rome. When Alexander the Great died in 323 BC, his empire stretched farther than any before it. Yet in a single generation, it broke apart. His generals, the Successors, or Diadochi, fought for decades over his lands, his legacy, and his dream of ruling the world. They betrayed each other, formed coalitions, and waged wars that reshaped the ancient world. But what, in the end, was their true legacy? The first part of their story was chaos. Perdiccas, Ptolemy, Antigonus, Seleucus, Lysimachus, Cassander, and Demetrius all tried to claim power. Some, like Ptolemy, chose stability. Like Demetrius, gambled everything in pursuit of glory. Their rivalries destroyed Alexander's family. His son Alexander IV and his mother Roxana were murdered. His half-brother Philip III was killed. The Argead dynasty that had ruled Macedonia for centuries ended in blood. The successors had torn down the very line that once united them, but out of their wars came new kingdoms. Ptolemy built a dynasty in Egypt that lasted almost 3 centuries. His descendants turned Alexandria into the brightest city of the ancient world, with its lighthouse, library, and bustling harbor. Seleucus built a vast Eastern empire, spreading Greek culture deep into Asia and founding cities that still carried his name. Though his empire later fractured, it remained a bridge between East and West for centuries. The Antagonids returned to Macedonia, giving the homeland of Alexander stability once more. And Lysimachus, though his dynasty did not last, showed how even the rough lands of Thrace could rise into history. Culturally, the successors left a lasting mark. Their kingdoms became places where Greek and local traditions mixed. In Egypt, Greek rulers took the title of pharaoh, blending themselves into the old ways. In Asia, Greek art, language, and philosophy mingled with Persian and Eastern traditions. This fusion created the Hellenistic world, a rich and vibrant culture that influenced everything from science and literature to architecture and trade. Yet their story is also a warning. The successors fought endlessly, wasting lives and wealth in their pursuit of power, None of them could ever fully reunite Alexander's empire. Instead, they carved it into pieces, each claiming to be his true heir, but none living up to his greatness. By the time Rome began to rise, the successors' kingdoms were weakened by their own rivalries. One by one, they fell to the Romans, who built an even greater empire on their ruins. And so, the legacy of Alexander's successors is one of both creation and destruction. They destroyed his family and his empire, but they also created new dynasties, new cultures, and new worlds. They could not match Alexander's brilliance, but they carried his flame into lands he had conquered, keeping his memory alive. Even today, when we hear of Alexandria's library, the Seleucid kings, or the Antigonid Phalanx, we are reminded of how far the shadow of Alexander stretched. His successors may have failed to unite the world, but they built the foundation of an age that would shape history for centuries.